So our very final new material for the year, which is crazy. So we are still in life science, and last chapter sets us up for this chapter. So a lot of what we're going to talk about wouldn't really make sense all the way if we didn't have a good understanding of meiosis and mitosis, which you guys do. And so part of the reason we go through cell reproduction so fast is because it kind of combines with this unit. And so we can kind of make the material and the practice and what we do a little bit more authentic for mitosis and meiosis in this unit. So we are going to add to it, and then it just kind of all fits together better than keeping everything kind of isolated. So now that you have the basics of cell reproduction, we are going to kind of combine that. So usually this unit people enjoy, they get kind of excited about because it's cool stuff. It's kind of cutting edge right now with all the different things that are happening, technology-wise and advancements in medical situations. So it's kind of interesting, and there's a lot that you'll hear like on the news and in current events. So it is kind of an important unit. Yes?
Shouldn't we wait till after Easter break to do this so we don't forget anything over Easter break?
Our break's not that long, and I have total faith in your brain power.
Yeah.
And we are on a countdown, right? Our test is May 2nd. So we don't have days to just like waste, right?
Yeah.
So we'll be good. We will do a review when we get back from break just to make sure it's fresh in your mind. But we're not getting into anything too complex here the next 2 days, so shouldn't be terrible. Okay, so the big picture here. We learned that every human body cell has 23 pairs of chromosomes in the nucleus, and that is the full amount that you need, correct? Because all the body cells need to have the full set of information. And each chromosome has a single strand of DNA that carries the code for a couple thousand different genes. Notice that these genes kind of sound like genetics, and they are not like the pants that you probably have on, Jeans. They are different. We're not talking about your pantalones, okay? And so our genes are basically a code made up of pairs of what we call base proteins, and it's the sequence of these proteins basically that code. So if you think of like coding with a computer, it's kind of a very similar type process. And so there's a code, and we can read that code, and it basically is the instructions for us, okay, for every cell, for every function in our body. It basically it's what is making up who we are, okay? And 99% of human DNA is actually the same. It's that 1% that makes us unique from each other. And so that's usually kind of a shocking percentage that, and if more people would kind of look at it scientifically, I think maybe we would have less social issues. Because if you think, okay, we're 99% the same, even though physically we all look very different, it might just help us like to realize like, hey, chill out, like we're a lot the same. We don't need to pick at every little differences and let that cause problems between us. So really that 1% does account for a lot, but 99%, I mean, that's overwhelming. Like we're all the same, like let's just get along. So sometimes we could learn from science. A lot of times we could learn from science. And obviously that 1%, a lot of it is those physical things that we see. Height, hair color, skin tone, all those different things. So sometimes we get so hung up on that 1%, unfortunately. And so there are also some things, and Audrey kind of asked me something yesterday. Sometimes there are environmental factors that have a huge effect on how somebody looks or their appearance. So there can be people or children that are malnourished, and so they don't develop the same as normally fed, healthy children. And so, you know, it's not that they were born that way, it was just the environment that they grew up in. They didn't have enough to eat, or they didn't have proper health care. So there are some environmental factors that can have a huge impact. And so just because somebody looks the way they do, doesn't mean that they got that from their genetics. All right, so I want to kind of put that out there. The other thing is that we're not going to talk much this year about learned behaviors. So I actually have a friend who is very, very scared of storms. And so she obviously, like, when storms, she's always watching her phone, she's always kind of being a little bit over the top, like, with worrying about things. And so now her children are that way. Were they born that way? No. That was a learned behavior because they're in that environment, in that home where the mother is very scared of storms. The children have learned, kind of just as a response to that, to be scared of storms as well. So understand that some things are learned behaviors. Have you guys heard that word before? That term? Okay. And some things are just genetically, you are genetically set up to be a certain way. So the other thing that can affect that are environmental. So learned behaviors are kind of fit under that category of environmental, because the environment that you grow up in or that you're exposed to, you know, and like I said, my friend who was scared of storms, she created the environment of being scared of storms, and so her children have picked up on that. Okay, so this is a little bit scary usually. These are identical twins. Oh my. So when they are born, genetically, they are identical, right? For all outward appearances, they were identical. Now, this woman chose to make very different choices than her twin sister on the right. And so you can see she probably maybe was a smoker, or maybe even possibly a drug user. Hard to tell, but the teeth kind of can give that away. Look at the wrinkles. You know, she's obviously showing much older. Her skin tone isn't as good. She's kind of pale and pasty, and so it's not that she was born that way. It was life choices. So the one on the right looks like she, you know, is definitely healthier, more fit. Probably eats better, probably gets better exercise, probably gets better sleep, you know, all those things. Yes?
Why do those pictures look like they're just photoshopped on them? They don't look like it's actually a person.
You don't think it looks like an actual person?
No, it looks very like.
It looks like someone just got like a face filter and put it on.
Maybe. I mean, but she actually has a mole there, and the other sister doesn't. And you can see, like, the shape of the nose is just a little bit different, and like the hairline's even a little bit different.
So they're not identical twins.
So they are identical, and so we will talk more about this. Even if they are considered genetically identical, there's going to be some outward physical appearances that are slightly different. So we'll talk about those after the test too. But just realize that there are definitely factors that can change your change your physical appearance, and so it's not necessarily changing your genetics. You still have the instructions and the same information to make you who you are. It's just like, what do you do with that body, with that shell, and how are you impacting it, I guess. Okay, so again, everything that we're going to talk about this unit, you guys are going to get into extreme detail. I was just talking to some sophomores that are in biology now, and they were studying for tests last Friday. And I was like, so, remember how I said in 8th grade, like, this stuff is an introduction and you're going to get into it really detailed and specific in biology? They're like, yes, we didn't believe you. You were so right. I'm like, can I have you guys come in and talk to my 8th graders just to warn them? Like, we are just touching the surface. You will get into the very nitty gritty of all this. So if you enjoy this unit, that's awesome, because there's a lot that you're going to get into more with Mr. Trainer in biology as a sophomore. But understand that this is, like, the better you can kind of get a grasp of it now, the easier it is. And they know, there were some classmates who they're like, I don't even remember talking about this. And they were struggling more than the people who actually were paying attention. You know, it's the end of the year and people are kind of like, whoa, you know, so I'm telling you, like, really focus. And you guys do a good job with this. I'm not too concerned, but just be aware, you're going to get into, and a lot of things that we don't have time to get into this year, you will get into a ton in biology. So just be aware of that. Okay. So we're going to start at the big picture, which is the cell. And then inside the cell is our nucleus. Inside the nucleus is where you're going to find all those chromosomes. Now, the chromosomes can be like this if they're getting ready to go through that cell division. A lot of times you're going to see the chromosomes like as that hairball before they condense into the chromosome form. But for simplicity's sake, most of the time their diagrams and things are going to show you the chromosomes like this instead of like a massive twirling combined little threads of DNA. And then notice how this chromosome, right, is being made of this strand of DNA. Okay, so this is the DNA, and then here, a section of that DNA we call the gene. Okay, so it's the gene. So from the cell to the nucleus to the chromosome to the DNA, and then just a little section of that DNA is the code for a specific trait or a specific feature. Right, and so we know that each human body cell contains about 24,000 genes, meaning, you know, code or information for 24,000 major pieces of information. And we call the complete set of genes the genome. And there's something actually called the Genome Project, where they are trying to map every single part of the DNA to know like what genes code for what specific features. And so this is really important. So if somebody has some kind of a medical issue, they know to look on chromosome 3 in this section of genes, and that's what codes for that particular issue. Yes. And so they can look and see, is there a problem with the DNA, right? Was there some kind of miscommunication, or was there some kind of glitch, or is there some kind of error, right? And so that Human Genome Project is a pretty cool, pretty enormous undertaking. And we've mapped about 92% of our human genome. So we know where about 92% of the material can be found for any specific trait or any specific feature. And so the human genome basically is like these tightly coiled threads of DNA and protein. And so DNA, typically, whenever you see this kind of ladder, we call this a double helix. Whenever you see this kind of ladder formation, it's always usually kind of twisted. And so that is signifying, hey, they're trying to show you DNA. It is short for deoxyribonucleic acid. And no, you don't have to spell that. We always use the abbreviation DNA, which is nice. And it's made from two strands twisted together in a double helix. So the strands are kind of like the sides of the ladder. Okay? Traits and qualities or characteristics of an organism are determined by the instructions that are coded basically by that DNA. So with computer coding, it's binary, right? Where you have a combination of zeros and ones. And it's just the pattern or the order of those zeros and ones that give us the code. Well, DNA actually has 4 it's not binary, right? It has 4 main sequences that are available. And I'll introduce those to you here in a second. Right, and so every cell in our body obviously has DNA, because without the DNA, the cell wouldn't know what to do, how to do, what kind of cell it's even supposed to be, or anything like that. And so instead of zeros and ones, we have these things called base pairs. And those base pairs are unique to each individual. And James Watson and Sir Francis Crick were the first ones to kind of discover this. And so they have been given credit for constructing the first accurate DNA model back in the 1950s. So really, if you think about it, it hasn't been that long. You're like, oh my gosh, 1950, it seems like a long time ago. But in the scheme of things, that's really not that long ago. So we've made an extreme amount of progress just in this last century. So here's what it looks like. Kind of looks like a twisted ladder. The sides of the ladder are sugar phosphate molecules, and the steps of the ladder are called the nitrogen bases. And it's those nitrogen bases that are basically the code. And so before a cell divides, its DNA duplicates itself by unwinding, and separating its sides. And so then the sugar phosphate molecules and one of the base pairs are on this side. It kind of like unzips, and then there's only, let me see real quick. Yes, let me go to this side. So here's the sugar phosphate. These are the nitrogen bases, okay? So the adenine and the thymine always pair together. The cytosine and the guanine always pair together. So it's always A and T together and C and G together, all right? So if this untwists and then unzips along the middle, one side will end up with the A, one side will end up with the T. And so to duplicate, what happens is the A over here will get another T over here, and the T that was originally here will get a new A. And so as it unzips, because they only have one complementing base pair, if you have an A here, then a new T will come, and then you form a new phosphate base, and then it basically just keeps unzipping, and then the new base pairs join in, and then the next thing you know, when it's all done, you have 2 complete sets. They're kind of like reverse images of each other, but they're the exact same strand, which is what you're after because the DNA needs to duplicate, right? So, again, I don't want you to get too hung up. You don't need to know any of this for this year. I just think it's a good introduction so that you can, as you get into biology, it's like, oh, okay, I do remember talking about this. But these 2 pairs always go together, and these 2 always go together. And so you can see it's always the pink, well, I guess the red and the blue, and it's always the green and the purple. And so as it duplicates, it untwists, then it unzips, and then the matching base pair joins up with the pair that's still attached to the sugar phosphate. Okay, and so sometimes you'll hear it called the phosphate backbone. It's basically just the sides of the ladder, and then I think of the nitrogen pairs as like the rungs of the ladder, or the steps of the ladder. Okay, and again, this isn't something that's going to be tested this year, but sometimes it's also nice to kind of understand like what's actually, like we keep saying DNA, what is it? Like what's it made of? What is it doing? Okay. And so you can see it here as well. So here's the cell, here's the nucleus, all of the chromosomes together, all the genes make up our genome. And so here is a chromosome, and if you think about like unwinding the DNA that makes up that chromosome, if you look at just this small section of DNA, that we call that the gene. And so again, you can see the cytosine and the guanine, the thymine and the adenine, right? The AT and the CG always together. Okay, so really the genes are just that section of DNA, and that is the section that contains the instructions for making the proteins. Okay, right? And genes can have different versions or forms of themselves. We call these different versions alleles. And it's always funny hearing you guys look at your vocab for the first time, and you're like, alleles, alleles, what is this, right? Usually nobody gets alleles from that word, okay? Alleles. And alleles are just the alternate version of a gene. So if you have the gene for eye color, well, there's different versions of that. It might be the brown color, might be the blue color, might be the green color, right? And so you have the trait, and then you have different versions of that trait. Okay, so we're going to talk about how different traits get passed from one generation to another, and that's what genetics is all about. So you have to have kind of a little understanding about like what's going on, and then it's like, okay, we know it doesn't just stay with the organism, it actually gets passed on. So how does that happen? What's that process? And that is what genetics is all about. It's the study of heredity and how those traits get passed from one generation to the next. Okay. And so I've said the word trait, but really it's just our genetic way of saying a quality or trait, or excuse me, a quality or characteristic that an organism actually has. Okay, so how tall, hair color, eye color, skin color, are you double jointed, do you have hitchhiker's thumb, do you have a widow's peak, do you have freckles, like all kinds of outward physical appearances that we'll talk about, dimples, curly hair, straight hair. Okay, and traits are more likely to help organisms survive, and those are the ones that get passed on. Now obviously humans kind of have messed that up a little, because we are able, in a good way, to survive in a lot of situations just because we live in houses, we have clothes, so we can stay warmer, we can stay colder, like we can help our survival in a lot more ways that most organisms can, all right? But if you're thinking in the wild, yeah, if there's a trait, like we talked about, Uncle Scar had that dark fur. If that dark fur becomes an advantage, then he's going to be able to survive and probably pass that trait on to his offspring, and then they will be able to pass that on, and so the dark fur could take over the normal colored lion fur. Okay, and so, you know, this all goes back to our whole survival of the fittest, and when a mutation or a variation becomes an advantage, and at that point it's no longer just a variation, or it becomes that adaptation. Okay. And so if a certain trait could help an organism to survive, then what event would be responsible for this, do you think? What would have had to happen, I guess, to make this necessary?
Like an environmental change?
Yeah, some kind of environmental change would have had to happen, right? And so this process slowly would be due, because of that environmental change. We learned last unit that meiosis would be the cell division that made this possible. Because if we're dealing with mitosis for reproduction, it's clones. They're all exactly the same. And so that's not going to help if the environment would change. And so here with meiosis, this is where it becomes super important, because now we understand this is where the variety comes from, right? Because you are getting half of the information from mom, half the information from dad. And so the organism that they make is going to be genetically similar, but not identical. And they could have multiple offspring that are not going to be identical to one another, right? Just like you and your siblings possibly. And it's during that meiosis process that chromosomes line up and genetic information can cross over. And so we saw that in one of the videos. They called that crossing over, where like one section of a chromosome went over to another chromosome and like flip-flopped. It's kind of like the shuffling of the deck. And so this shuffling allows for genetic variation, right? we didn't get that when you were just photocopying during mitosis reproduction. Right? Good. All right, let's go ahead, and it's showing that here. So when the homologous chromosome pairs are lined up, at that center line, right, these flip-flop and they crisscross. Right, and we'll look at this a little bit more